Throughout the 19 books spanning Elan, we've had to endure the deaths of many characters, from small side characters we barely knew, all the way up to the main characters of books. So today, we're going to go over the top 13 most tragic deaths in Elan. Not decided by me, but by many of you. We had almost 100 readers rank what they thought were the most tragic deaths in Elan. Those ranks were assigned points, and we compiled the results. And of course, since we're talking about deaths, there's going to be huge spoilers for all the series. Let's get started. Theron Wood died on the scorched ground in a pool of blood and dirt. As he did, the last tiny remnant of hope Thrace had held on to, the last foothold she had in the world, died with him. Theron was Thrace's father, and this death was so emotional mostly for what it did to Thrace. She had lost her whole family to the attacking Brin, had risked her life crossing the country to get help for her father, returned with help, was gravely wounded, but despite all of this, her and her father were finally ready to leave. But just before they could, her father was killed by the Brin, absolutely shattering Thrace mentally. It would take her multiple books to recover, and even then, she was never the same. Hilfred collapsed to his knees. His body hitched. Aris, he sputtered. Oh, Hilfred, Arista whispered as her eyes burned. The knight stood over him. One raised his sword. Arista, he cried. The knight's sword came down. Similarly to the last entry, Hilfred's death came right after it seemed things were finally going his way, which in his case was showing his love for Arista and getting her love in return. And while, when his death first came out during the Revelation series, it was bad enough, when we finally got the book, The Rose and the Thorn, we got to see a young Hilfred as a main character, and learn just how honorable and selfless he had been his entire life, despite his rough upbringing, making his death a testament to just how unfair life could be. Sheldon raised his hands, and a blinding bolt of white light shot forth, passing through the Empress Dowager's chest and striking the far wall. Sephryn collapsed to the floor with a 6-inch hole burned through her. Sephryn did live a long life, outliving her friends and even her son, and while she didn't feel ready to die when the moment finally came, the main tragedy of her death is she is one of the few inhabitants of Elan who broke Farrell's law during her life, meaning she won't be able to pass to the afterlife, forcing her to remain on Elan as a spirit, barring her from being with her parents, husband, son, and friends. No, death is not something to be feared, Ezra. It is not some wrong to be fixed. Death is necessary. Death is part of life. Fighting the end is the way of the Riva, the way of the Rao. This is my last lesson to you. Learn it well. The old Arkham priestess lay still beside Mashi. Too still. She wasn't breathing. Hekkebah? Ezra reached out and placed a hand on hers. Hekkebah? Hekkebah Zar was a character we knew for less than half a book, and yet her death was a painful one. She lost both her partner and child in her quest to fulfill Turin's goal, traveled across the world, found a young Esrahaddon, and raised him, all the while knowing that she would die before Esrahaddon could accept his gift and change the world. And for Esrahaddon, Hekkebah had acted as his true mother for most of his childhood, which made the scene heartbreaking. And if Hekkebah had been a more established character, she probably would have been even higher on this list. Her brother looked back at her, his face frightened. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry I wasn't a better brother, a better king. Arista, you should have ruled instead of me. You are always smarter, stronger, more courageous. I was jealous. I'm sorry. Please forgive me." She reached out and almost caught hold of him. Their fingertips touched briefly. Then he slipped away. When we first met Alric, he was a bit arrogant, pompous, and even paranoid. And while he had been through a lot with the death of his parents and becoming king, he still had a lot of developing to do. But throughout the Revelation series, we saw him grow as a person. So to see such growth wasted as he was cut down by goblins in Persepolis while saving his sister was a tragedy, only heightened by Arista's failure to save him after the fact. Suri felt the hair on her neck rise. She began to put up the shield, but before she could, Arion shoved Suri backward with an incredible force. "What was—" Suri began when a flash of light blinded her and the whole upper portion of the tower exploded. Arion was another character who we saw go through personal growth, this time in the Legend series. When we first met her, she was already a thoughtful and capable teacher, but she thought very little of any race other than her own. But in her travels, her worldview expanded, and when she met the humans of Dal Ren, she began to realize the error of her ways. She would become Suri's teacher and friend. And by the time of the Battle of Granford, Suri had already lost her childhood friend Minna, and only had two friends left, Arion and Raithe. And it was then that Arion reflexively chose to sacrifice herself to save Suri. Muavin ignored his own defense to save his brother. He thrust out. In one move, he blocked both attacks on Fanen, but at a cost. Hadrian saw the Surette standing before Muavin thrust. The blade penetrated Muavin's side. Instantly, the elder Pickering buckled. He fell to his knees with his eyes still on his brother. He could only watch helplessly as the next blow came down. Two swords entered Fanen's body. Blood coated the blades. While the middle son of the Pickering family was never a main character, Fanen's bond with his older brother Muavin was clear, and it was this fact that made Fanen's death almost hard to read. When Fanen was struck in battle, Muavin did everything he could do to save Fanen, only to be stabbed himself, making him helpless to watch as his little brother was murdered right in front of him. Muavin's rescue by Hadrian was almost bittersweet, as this event scarred Muavin for the rest of the series. "Too late," Esrahaddon whispered, his eyes locked intently on hers. "Can't help me. Poison. Arista, listen. There's no time." His words came hurriedly between struggles to take in air. On his face was a look of determination mixed with desperation, like that of a drowning man searching for a handhold. "Only you know now. Only you can save. Patriarch is the same." The next breath never came. The next words were never uttered. The pulsating brilliance of his robe faded, leaving them all in darkness. Esrahaddon was originally one of the most mysterious characters in Elan, and his death marked the failure of a quest he had spent almost his entire life on, enduring nearly 1,000 years of imprisonment only to be killed a mere year before the Uli Vermar was set to expire. And while this would make his death sad, I think the reason it rose so high on this list is due to the fact that last year we got the release of the novel Esrahaddon, which detailed his early life. We saw everything he sacrificed in order to protect Nevrik, the heir of the Empire. And this also amplified his dying regrets and brought more meaning to his final thoughts of his true love, Elinia. As she plummeted, mist sprayed Brin's face and her hair flew back. She wasn't afraid. She'd done this before. She knew what she was leaving behind and what lay ahead. Her work on Elan was done, but she had unfinished business on the other side. "Hang on, Tesh. I'm coming." Brin's death actually surprised me with how high it ended on this list. On one hand, Brin's death was pretty unexpected. She had made it through the entire Legend series and had even gone through the afterlife and back. But at the very end of that series, she chose to sacrifice her life to save her friends from Trylos. And she did all of this before the age of 23, while also being one of the most honest, good, and kind characters in the entire series. So with all of that making her a fan favorite, the ranking does make sense. But on the other hand, she did choose her death and face it fearlessly. And she is one of the few characters who knew for a fact that there was an afterlife waiting for her, and she even had a reason to go to it, to save Tesh. But now, we get to what are by far the 4 highest ranked deaths. He squeezed her hand tighter. I'm here, Gwen. I have you. I'm not letting go. I'll never let go. Promise me. You must promise. Please, Royce. I promise, he told her. I love you, Royce. Don't forget. Don't let go. I love you. Don't let... Her body hitched again. She struggled to breathe, stiffened in his arms, and then slowly, gradually, fell limp. Her head tilted backward. Clutching her tightly to his chest, he kissed her face. Gwen was gone, and Royce was alone. If you had told a reader in 2012 who had just finished Riyria Revelations that Gwen's death would someday be rated the 4th most tragic death in Elan, I don't think they would have ever believed you. Several factors contributed to the heartbreak of Gwen's death, such as how unexpected it was, as it had seemed Royce was about to successfully save her. Another reason being the absolute betrayal once we realized who her murderer actually was. But nothing was more heartbreaking than what it did to Royce. Royce grew up learning how cold and unforgiving the world was. He learned to trust no one, and it took years with Hadrian and Gwen to finally let his guard down. But with Gwen's murder, Royce regressed, going back to his ruthless self, losing all hope and even losing the will to live. After enduring a harsh and bitter life, he had finally found love, only for it to be taken from him. Sorry? Persephone spoke softly as she took the mystic's hands in hers. Sorry, what happened? Whose blood is that? I killed her, Suri said. I killed her. I killed her. I loved her, and I killed her. Arion said it was the only way to reach the deep chords, and it was. And it did. When this poll started, I actually thought Minna was going to top it easily. When this scene came out, the reactions of readers were so strong, with some people even stating they were going to stop reading the series. The wolf Minna had been Suri's best friend ever since Suri found her as a pup, and the two became nearly inseparable from that moment on. During the scene in the Agave, I was as confused as Persephone at whose blood was on Suri, and was just in shock when I realized it was Minna's. Minna had always been the most loyal and fierce companion to Suri, and this event completely broke Suri, who was only a 12-year-old girl at the time. We would get a bit of relief 4 books later, but that was a long time to live with the death of the world's wisest wolf. I don't know who this is going to hurt more, Raithe said. Me or you. Suri lifted her head to look at him, tears running down her face. Me. Just so you know, I'm not leaving anything behind, Raithe told her. In many ways, you're doing me a favor, if that makes this any easier. Suri placed her hand upon the black shimmering blade. It doesn't. Suri really didn't get any breaks in the Legend series, but with Raithe, she would be forced to kill the person who may be her last friend in the world. Raithe had never asked for anything that had happened to him in the lead up to the war with the Fray, but when it finally came down to it, He honored the sacrifices his mother and sisters had made in keeping him alive, and offered himself as a sacrifice. This obviously would scar Suri, as she had to perform the kill. It also led to loose ends with Persephone, who loved Raithe, but she would not even have time to talk to him before his death. He took her face in his hands. There are moments in time that are incredibly cruel. The worst occur when true greatness begins to bud, but is snuffed out before the blossom. You are the star allowed only to flicker briefly in the morning light, erased by the rising sun. You are my executioner, then? Tears ran the length of his face. I don't know if I can. You must. I can't. He pressed his wet cheek to hers, holding tight. The sun is rising. Farilane thumbed away his tears. My star must fade. Kyle began to shake. Afterward, Farilane said, afterward, you can have pie. With trembling lips, he dared what no other man had, and kissed her. In doing so, he stole her breath away. The fact that the character who tops this list was only ever in a single book is a testament just to how strong of a connection readers felt to the character of Farilane. The sudden realization of her inevitable death took most readers by surprise, especially as we had just read an entire book with her as the main character. We saw as she came to terms with her decision to sacrifice herself. But what is likely the most impactful part of her death is Turin's role in it. As a fan favorite, we saw a side of Turin that had never been shown before. We saw him as a man in love, and then saw him choosing to sacrifice what would have been his love, his children, and his happy family. Acting as executioner, he does to himself exactly what he had done to Muriel tens of thousands of years earlier, forever cutting himself off from his true love. If all of that was not already enough, the book faded out as we saw Muriel raining feathers down on her father. Turin had often spent hundreds of years of work just to gain a single feather from his daughter, but due to Farilane's death, he now ignored the feathers, even as hundreds fell all around him.
Thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to subscribe and watch my other videos to learn more about the world of Elan and Riyria. Thanks!